Today, I wanted to make a video about the top tech sales interview questions and answers. And on top of that, I wanted to provide more context as to why you may think your answers are good, but the ways that you can do little and subtle things to immediately put yourself in the top 10% of candidates that are applying for any given opening. We'd really appreciate it if you subscribe, as we're getting a lot of corporate attention from recruiting companies, and my goal is to use this channel as a way to connect everyone who's viewing, who's on our online communities, to more and more opportunities that are out there in the tech sales world. Now, I can sit here and tell you the most common questions, but I think the important thing to prepare for is the entire framework of a standard entry-level interview in tech sales. Because I think so many people, they tell themselves and prepare maybe on a one-off basis for questions like, tell me about your background, all of these different things. And these are questions that you need to be prepared for. So many people just sit there and reactively respond to different questions that are cookie cutter. And they're not using the anticipation of the entire structure of an interview to then set themselves apart by leading the conversation and actually subconsciously taking control of where it's going. So as an example, I'm going to talk more about common questions and how to answer them, but even between those questions, using your answers, you can queue up the next question ahead of time, and you can also very strongly, without being over the top, over eager, things of this nature, you can communicate that you have a very strong desire to be in sales if you're trying to break in for the first time, and or a very strong desire to work for this company specifically. So yes, of course, common questions would include things like, tell me about your background. That's almost always where it starts. Then the next question, they're either going to say, wow, that's really great. They may have a follow-up question or two. And then they're either going to ask you, what do you know about our company? Or they may tell you, hey, I want to tell you a few things about our company and the opportunity that you're applying for. But again, before we even get ahead of that question, let's take a moment to pause and think about the difference between an average answer and one that's going to set us up and set us apart from the rest. So I could sit here as an example if they ask me about my background, and I have such an eclectic background of so many different experiences. It's often difficult for me to talk about everything and build a cohesive story. But over time, that is what I found that so many people are lacking, is they basically present their information and say, yeah, I worked at this job, and then maybe I went to school for this, and then I worked at this job, and now I'm here. And I know it's not like that cut and dry and horrible, but that's effectively what you're presenting. And that answer is such a missed opportunity where you could go and communicate, yes, your different background, but how did that all culminate and lead to you wanting to break into tech sales, wanting to change jobs, etc. And this is where so many people just reactively respond with the information that's asked for and don't take control of the conversation. And as best as I can, let me give an example. When someone asked me about my background, I studied engineering, I worked as an engineer for 3 years, I also played sports internationally with Team USA, and now I've been in sales for 3 years and I'm looking to make a job change. If I just answered with that information, I mean, yes, that's interesting. Maybe if it's a recruiter or a manager who, for whatever reason, isn't super excited about the conversation they're having now, they may just gloss over it and you've missed a ton of opportunity to go really into depth, not only on your background, but really position strongly and confidently why you're in that interview in the first place. And so again, the flip side is you don't want to give a 6-minute response to a question where they're hoping for maybe a 60 to 120 second answer. But one thing that I like to do, and let's take the example of when I broke into tech sales. So I had worked as an engineer for 3 years. I had just taken a year off to play sports overseas. And I could have just kind of laid that out, matter of fact. But instead, what I'm doing is saying, hey, yeah, I'm happy to provide a lot of context. I've done a few different things. So feel free at any point to stop me or probe further after my answer. I was an engineer for 3 years right out of school. I was also training and playing sports full time for Team USA. And to make a very long story short, in my engineering role, I actually got a lot of exposure to technical sales because I was helping sales reps scope different deals, or I was troubleshooting and supporting key accounts. And so for instance, if I found a gap in what they were doing, what they were trying to accomplish, and some of our different technology that I was knowledgeable in could solve that issue, I would bring that to their attention, and I would also bring in the account management team, which really piqued my interest in sales because I hadn't learned much about it in college. And then fast forward a year, again, I'm happy to provide further information, but I actually got to this point where I was working and training full time. It just became too much, and I had to make a really difficult decision to take a year off and play overseas. But that being said, throughout that year, I had some great experiences. I got a chance to play in X, Y, and Z, et cetera, et cetera. But when I came back to the workforce and knew that I wanted to stay in tech, I knew that the logical next step for me was going into tech sales. And you see the difference. If I just lay out my information and basically end it with like, so now I'm here, ha ha ha, like now I've communicated and given them and also made it very clear I want them to probe into my background further, which again, I've set up the fact I have some relevant experience, I've been exposed to sales. So now the next logical question from the manager is, oh, that sounds very interesting. Tell me more about some of the sales procedures or processes that you were exposed to during that time. And now I've gained control of the conversation. I have very good stories about that, and I've convinced them now that I really want to be in sales, right? And this is just an example. I can obviously get carried away on the different types of ways you can answer the question. But again, you want to lead them to, one, have more interest in your background, and two, clearly and concisely communicate without looking desperate, without being overeager, that you truly want to be in sales. Now, going to a typical second question, which is, tell me what you know about our company. This is an area where so many people could take 20 minutes and have so much of a better answer. Because I can't tell you how many times that it's very clear they've seen like one thing on the website, or they're like, yeah, tech sales has always been interesting to me and I have a really competitive personality, and they're not actually answering why that company. But again, if you take 20 minutes to understand maybe the sales training program that they have, or maybe why they're better than a bunch of their different competitors, these are things you can quickly communicate in the matter of a 30-second response that are going to make them see, wow, they're really interested in sales from your first answer that we just talked through. And two, they have a clear and well-articulated desire to work at this company. So it's the difference in saying, wow, yeah, I'm a very competitive person. I like being in tech. I like being in a fast-paced environment, and tech sales is really for me. When instead, if you took 20 minutes again to research or even reach out to existing reps at the company on LinkedIn, you could say, yeah, one of the things that really piqued my interest is, yes, I have the technical background. Yes, I'm interested in the technology that you're selling, but your sales training program where you take new candidates and walk them through for 3 months, a really extensive and rigid training program. I think me being new to sales, even though I have career experience or whatever it may be, that is going to be a huge leg up for me long-term in my career. And I see so many reps at this company that have had success because of that. 30-second answer maximum. And I have now clearly articulated my desire to work at this company without being desperate, without saying, oh yeah, this company I know is a market leader and it just looks like an amazing place to work. I've taken 15 minutes on their website and just had a 30-second answer that is super crisp and compelling. If you're doing your interview well, you're having some good back and forth with the manager. Ideally, again, in that first question, tell me about your background. That may take, 7 to 10 minutes if you're doing it effectively, because you've created entry points for them to probe in further to your background, probe in further and try and get to know really who you are as a person. You're probably gonna have maybe 10 to 12 minutes left in the interview where it's open to questions. And again, keep in mind, this is a round one entry-level interview. So certainly as you progress further through the interview process, there's going to be more things you need to take into account. But again, another missed opportunity here where people show up to the table with maybe one question max or just very generic, uninspiring questions. Let's take this example that you've articulated that you have tons of interest in their sales training program. When they're asking at the last half or last 10 minutes of the interview, what questions do you have for me? Refer back to the fact that you're very interested in their sales training program as an example, and say, yeah, I know I mentioned earlier about your sales training program. I'm curious, obviously you have gone through that and had a lot of success yourself. Just so I'm aware, coming in, I have a lot of interest in tech sales, but I really know that I can benefit and kind of sharpen my skill set with this training. I'm curious from your perspective, both on an individual experience, what you gained the most from that, and then also when you've seen people like myself coming from a different background, coming with no sales experience, what I can expect to get the most out of it. And again, very simple stuff, very easy questions. And people instead show up to the table and they're like, yeah, how many of your reps are hitting attainment? Or what do you like most about your job? Again, that's not necessarily going to lose the interview if you have an interesting background, if you've been doing well to that point. But my point being in making this video and just talking about this is there are so many small things. All you need to do is take a little bit of extra time to crisp up your answers. Take a little bit of time to do a little bit more research. And lastly, and most importantly, especially if you have no tech sales experience or you haven't been in an interview in a long time, you need to practice saying this out loud. Whether it's in the shower, whether it's when you're driving, whether it's when you're taking a walk, you need to actually say this out loud, and not just in your head, but out loud. Doing this will make it in a game time situation if you're a little bit nervous, a little bit off kilter, if you've kind of gone through that muscle memory of saying these short and concise answers, worst comes to worst, you can usually power through as opposed to just being completely unprepared or sitting back on your couch for 15 minutes and kind of walking through it mentally, but not actually saying it, not actually practicing articulating the different words. These are the small things that are going to set you apart, not only as a top candidate in the interview process, but are going to serve you well in your sales career. So I hope that helps. I know, again, my approach is never to say, these are the top 3, and this is exactly how you should answer it. But the reason that I speak in more of this higher level framework is because so many people just want to have the one answer. So many people want to know the exact thing to say. And it's not about that. It's about creating a compelling story about your background, tying it into the fact and making it very convincing that you do want to be in sales, that you do want to work at the company that you're interviewing at, etc. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below. Also, if you're thinking about and actively in the process of breaking into tech sales in the first time, make sure to check out our playlist that actually walks through numerous different videos that we have talking about the ins and outs of resume prep, interview prep, etc. And until next time, have a great week. Thanks.